The first thing, of course, we have to do is ask, oh, what do we mean by climate resilient development? So climate resilient development, at least for the IPCC's definition of it, broadly speaking, is the implementation of climate action in a manner that supports sustainable development going forward. That means thinking about greenhouse gas mitigation as well as adaptation to climate impacts and how you address those in a manner that facilitates improved human well-being. A critical point here is that climate action and sustainable development are interdependent. You cannot think of these things separately. The decisions we make about how, for example, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions greatly shapes the opportunities we have in terms of sustainable development. And similarly, the things we do in terms of adaptation will either facilitate or hinder people's efforts to develop in a sustainable manner over time. So we have to think of all these things together. There are multiple pathways toward improved human well-being under climate change. It is not there are no pathways or that there's only one. There are lots of ways. And these vary a lot by place. I'm going to take this up toward the end of my comments here. But they also vary by effectiveness, and that matters a lot if we're thinking forward about what kind of world we all want to live in over the next several decades, let alone a century from now. Now, this is the story that I think many people, especially those who work in transportation, have heard before. The opportunities created by transportation networks, the economic growth and impact that you get from a productive transportation network. But I also want to tie in that this transportation network was actually making these communities somewhat climate resilient. There's an important point to the story I'm telling you about roads and resilience and climate. And that is that we tend to think about resilience as a response to a specific kind of impact. So for example, here in this slide, you see the harbor area around Boston flooding at a king tide, something that didn't happen, by the way, when I was a child and now happens quite regularly. But resilience is more than the response to a specific impact, because a critical point about climate resilience that this story tells us is that that which makes us resilient, in this case, a transportation network and economic diversification in the face of a changing climate, also shapes the character of our vulnerability. We have to remember that vulnerability to climate change has three parts if we're going to think about this in the context of climate resilient development. Exposure, which is the part we tend to think about, the climate hazard that occurs in a particular place. But then there's also sensitivity. Who or what actually is impacted by or feels the impact of that climate event? And then adaptive capacity, the ability to manage, to deal with that particular shock or stressor. The case of Domenanzi I just presented to you and that road story, the abandonment speaks to different sensitivity and adaptive capacity across the population. So if we're going to think about vulnerability to climate change, we must understand that it has these three components. Exposure in a particular place tends to hit everyone. We're all exposed to temperature change living in one place. We're all exposed to precipitation change. But our sensitivity and adaptive capacity are very uneven, even in a particular place, even at the level of a household. Climate vulnerability depends on who you are, what you do, the assets you have, things of that nature. And therefore, resilience building actions, adaptation actions will never benefit everyone equally. They'll always play out unevenly in communities. We have to keep that in mind. That which makes us resilient also shapes the character of our vulnerability. Anytime we take an action to address a specific challenge in the world, we're talking about climate today, but that could be any number of challenges. We have to start asking ourselves, what new things have we introduced? What new challenges have we brought to the table? And how are those things potentially vulnerable? How might those be challenged? Second, climate resilient development, moving forward in a way that gets us to a future where people's well-being is improved, hinges on our ability to understand and incorporate issues of justice and equity into our problem identifications and our interventions. And finally, the big lesson here is that transformation is necessary. It's too late to do things incrementally. We're going to have to make bigger changes, perhaps than even we want. But attention to justice and equity it's going to be critical to determining if the transformations we undertake, whatever those are, if they work and who they work for. That's why a climate resilient future is a just and equitable future.